So, welcome back to Mind Matter CogSci Talks, the podcast where we kind of explore the fascinating world of cognitive science through conversations with researchers, engineers, and innovators helping shape the future of intelligence. So, today I'm thrilled to welcome Marta, an AI and cognitive science researcher, assistant professor at Dalhousie University, research scientist at MIT, and founder of Northlight Intelligence. So her work explores one of the most fascinating questions, in my opinion, in cognitive science, which is how humans and intelligent machines reason, plan, and learn together. And her research combines insights from cognitive science to artificial intelligence to kind of better understand human decision making while also building AI systems that can think and collaborate with us more effectively. So, and I guess beyond academia, she also works with organizations to develop trustworthy and effective AI strategies, which helps bridge the gap between cutting edge research and real world applications. So, thank you so much for joining us today, and it's a pleasure to have you on Mind Matter CogSci Talks. So, I guess before we dive really deep into like your research, could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself? What kind of first got you interested in cognitive science and artificial intelligence? And was there like a particular class, or maybe was it like you discovered what you wanted to do in like college, or was it like high school that kind of made you realize that this is the field that you kind of wanted to dedicate your career to?
Sure. So thanks, Sophie, for this wonderful introduction. Um, there is not a single cause, but as a child, I always loved puzzle books, and these are the kinds of math puzzle books with logical puzzles where it is supposed to be fun and you're supposed to solve how some pieces of a larger puzzle fit together. So to give you an example, um, there is a seven bridges of Königsberg. It is called Order's problem. But imagine a city divided by a river into several islands, and there are bridges between the islands. So the problem is, can you start in some given place marked with a flag and walk across all of these bridges in a way that crosses each bridge exactly once? It doesn't matter where you end up, but you have to walk and visit each bridge exactly once and then stop. So when most people encounter this problem, they start by trying lots of different routes by trial and error. And that's certainly what you would do if you were a teenager seeing this book. But eventually you solve it and you find a solution. But to a curious teenager, finding just one solution feels oddly unsatisfying. Because what happens if you remove one island? Or does that solution still exist if you remove one bridge? How did somebody design this puzzle in the first place to make it challenging but still solvable, right? Because if you remove one and suppose you cannot solve it anymore, so you try to get into the designer's mind. The surprising thing about this puzzle is that there actually is a general way to decide whether any puzzle of this kind, and they're called graph traversal problems, has a solution. And so if you discover that solution, that method, you're solving not just one puzzle, you're solving many puzzles of this similar kind. And it turns out that Euler found that the existence of solution to this puzzle depends on the number of odd degree vertices. So, the solution may or may not exist. You can formally discover why that is. And uh, and I also enjoyed puzzles in other forms. Like I like to read detective books. I liked physics. So now physics is this exciting because it provides tools for discovering simple ideas that might explain seemingly very complex phenomena. So, for instance, something very unintuitive like gravity. It's fascinating that you can actually write an equation to tell you how this works and how Earth moves around the sun. Um, but um, but even so, for people, there seem to be no equations to understand them. Even though people seem to behave in predictable ways in some way, like we all have intuitions about when will somebody change their mind, why do people trust each other, or how do they make decisions. There seemed to be a logic to this, but I did not see a way of thinking about it in the same way, even though it is a puzzle. And later, I discovered that those equations actually exist. So here's another example. So imagine that somebody gives an American high school student $1,000. And so what's the reaction of that person? The person is happy. This is a significant amount of money. This is good. But now suppose we give $1,000 to Elon Musk. And he's not going to be excited. He simply may not even notice this. He doesn't care. And so intuitively, the value of money diminishes as somebody has more. And the psychology of that relationship is actually very well described mathematically using theory of subjective value. So that's just one example. But you can write equations about people and you can predict people that way. And I thought that was exciting.
Yeah, that's definitely
Um,
really interesting that you bring up the example of like giving money to two different people who are like they view life and they view this like one thing as very differently, even though it's the same amount. I feel like in nowadays world, like that's so like your views on something depend on your experiences and how you kind of value that. So that's really cool that you can write equations about people. I didn't know you could like predict how one person thinks using like equations. That's
it is
really
a
cool.
logarithmic relationship, but you can look it up.
Mm-hmm. So I guess like cognitive science is all about understanding the mind, which is really cool because through all these puzzles, like everyone thinks differently. And a lot of the times these puzzles, right, they have different ways to solve them, and everyone thinks differently. Everyone approaches the problem with different, like a different lens. So has there been a discovery about like human thinking that has completely changed the way that you look at intelligence or like how you look at these problems or like these puzzles that you're trying to solve?
Mhm. So when I was a university student, I discovered something about attention. And that was the biggest surprise for me, that we don't experience the world around us in the same way. So imagine that our senses receive a large amount of information every second from different sources, from vision, from auditory information, smell, and it's in terms of information theory, that's a huge amount of information that comes in. But our brain only processes a small fraction of it. And what that means is that two people can walk into the same room, they could have the same interaction, and they could have completely different subjective experience of what happened simply because of how they directed the attention. And this is why stage magic works. When you go into a magic show, stage magician is a mastermind of directing attention. Attention is not about what you are looking at, it is what about the brain is selecting and what sensory information you decide to process consciously. And that's what drew my interest in cognition and modeling perception, modeling, understanding that process mathematically.
It's really interesting that, oh yeah, you're right about how magicians like they make you purposely like look at something so then you can't like figure out the magic part behind it. That's really interesting because I was just thinking about when you were talking about like when two people walk into the same room, they kind of observe different things. And I saw this fact that no one sees like the same color. What are your thoughts on that? Like when you like no one can see the same color. Like my red is not like the way you see red. And it's kind of like
Oh,
when Mhm.
so there are different receptors for green actually.
Oh, really?
And yes, so people have three receptors for red, green, and blue cones, but green has two different types of receptor.
Mm,
Okay, and so there is green that is in terms of wavelengths that is a little bit more red, and there is green that is a little bit more yellow, and blue, sorry. So green that is more yellow and green that is more blue.
mm,
Okay. And so if a person comes in and says, this is green, this looks like the perfect green to me. That perfect green, that is what like the actual green is going to be different depending on who you are. And how that is determined is purely genetic. So you don't know whether you see the same green as I do,
mm.
because
Yeah.
unless like we have a perceptual test to determine whether we are the same or different. But with attention, the situation is more so that there is continuous filtering of information. The information that arrives to the retina on the eye
Mm.
has huge resolution, but what can go through the optic nerve, through the eye socket, is much more compressed version of it, right? So that's just one simple example of that transformation that happens, but it keeps happening further down as that signal gets processed in the brain, and it is increasingly selective. So imagine that two different people come into the same museum room, right? And they look at it's a natural history museum, and then they come out and you say, "What did you see?" Obviously, they will tell you different things. They have seen the same thing, they attended to a different thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think perspective definitely matters a lot. And I think earlier I had an episode where I talked to someone about like how experiences also shape like the way you perceive things. Like for example, if you walk into that museum and one artwork really resonates with you, I feel like you would be more likely to think about it and like talk about it when you're asked that question. So I guess now kind of diving into AI since it's such an important topic and I feel like everyone around me wants to study AI because and it's such like an important and crucial topic to be talking about because of its possible advancement and also its ethical concerns. So I guess like do you think studying how the human brain processes things and how it thinks kind of is essential for kind of building AI? Or do you think AI is just like something that like everyone can build and like it doesn't really it doesn't really differ based on what you study. Like if you study computer science or versus if you study like something that studies the brain more, like what are your thoughts on that?
This is a question that people sometimes debate and have different opinions about. I like to think about intelligence from the perspective of evolutionary biology. So imagine that different organisms solve the same problem in different ways. Like flight. Birds and bats and insects and airplanes, they all fly in a different way, but the puzzle is the same. It is how to transport yourself through air from one point to another, right? And we can understand the physics of flight by understanding those specific examples because our goal is to understand the problem. So each of those examples adds to our understanding. And likewise, humans and AI could be solving reasoning problems differently. But we can try to understand the problem by studying the solution. So when we study human solution, that tells us more about what we need to make it work in AI.
Mm, interesting. Yeah. I know a lot of people have been talking about how AI can replace humans in like jobs and everything, but your work kind of seems to focus on the collaboration between AI and humans. So do you think that's the future, especially since like I've seen facts that are like nowadays like students like middle school students they have a lot of difficulty working mainly because they like do cognitive offloading, so they're offloading all of these like critical thinking skills to the AI. So what are your thoughts on like collaboration?
So let me tell you a little bit what it is like to be cognitive scientist. And when you're a cognitive scientist, you write equations and design algorithms that explain how people solve problems. And when you do this with people, we run experiments in which people solve puzzles, like the oldest problem that I described, and then we record behavior. And we try to understand how people solve this based on all of these little behavioral measurements like eye movements and reaction time, mouse movement. And so you can apply the same approach to any system that behaves intelligently, to humans and machine and animal. You can give AI the same puzzle, and then you try to understand what is the underlying strategy, right? And that naturally raises the question, well, when is AI and human intelligence different? When is it complementary? And when human is actually going to be much better? Um, so, so what you said about the quality of these are different intelligences. They are not the
Mm,
same intelligence, right? Um, Sometimes people think that AI has answers to everything, or it will eventually have those answers, become the better version of a human. But it is really a different kind of intelligence. And the problems that it can easily solve and the problems that people can easily solve are different problems. So now, the secret to using AI productively is understanding that complementarity, that it is not all or nothing. It is knowing how to use it strategically and how to adapt to it. I think your second question that you brought in is about students losing their skills. Would you like me to talk about it now
Oh,
or
sure. Yeah, sure.
okay? So the concern that like many people and parents and university professors share is erosion of quality of decision making. And when this happens when, say, the skilling or cognitive over-reliance, when students solve problems with AI. And the mechanism by which this arises is that generative AI often produces mistakes that seem plausible because they are okay on the surface. Um, and for writing industry, they traditionally have proofreaders, they have fact checkers that detect those mistakes. But when the actual mistake is a lack of argument depth, correcting that mistake is very hard for most people because they don't have practice, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so to catch an AI mistake, you have to have an expertise where you are more qualified than AI that produced it, right? And on one hand, this is domain knowledge, which is like being able to understand the notation, the terminology, but also more important is the ability to critically engage with that argument. So,
Mhm.
for instance, like when I try to sometimes save my typing effort and use AI to try to expand my argument, I'm surprised how bad it is.
Mhm.
If it is a research or science adjacent argument, it's terrible. But if it is summarizing meeting notes or some general domain knowledge, it's really good. But then they find concerning is like if I talk to a student, I often hear from students that this opinion that AI writes better than them. And this is diagnostic of the underlying situation where people don't yet have the expertise to see the weakness in the output. And that makes them inclined to accept what was suggested to them instead of critically engaging, right? Um,
Mhm.
and so automating decision making doesn't necessarily make people worse. Simply having AI doesn't make you the skill or make you less capable to learn. Um, for instance, GPS navigation doesn't make you worse at navigating. It makes it more convenient for you to drive because you don't have to check them up.
Mhm.
Um, and the skilling is not a uniform risk with all AI use, but the risk is when the importance of critical thinking is somehow overlooked, when people actually need to evolve it alongside and sometimes because of AI systems, but they don't know when to do it and how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense for sure. I guess on the same topic of concerns, as AI gets more powerful and since it gets more integrated into like healthcare, finance, and education and other important areas, I know like a lot of institutions, like for example, like Mount Sinai, they have like Claude Pro access just for like all their students and professors to use. What kind of concerns you about that? Or just like AI getting powerful and getting like more integrated into these important areas?
I think that critical thinking will have to be a skill that is explicitly encouraged. Because if it is not, this is the risk, that people accept an AI output that is given to them, and when that output is not perfect, and it is necessarily going to be imperfect in many ways, that can lead people to learn more slowly, but also sort of just accept systems that
Mm.
produce output that you would have produced better as a human. But there is like this tolerance of okay, just okay this.
Yeah.
And you know what happens when you interact with an AI chatbot and you say, I want to talk to a human, I want to talk to a human because it's not doing what you want.
Yeah.
And I think we want to have less of this and not more.
I think it's definitely important to maintain like the idea of critical thinking and the ability to still critically think. I feel like a lot of people nowadays, they just accept whatever AI does because they don't need to think. And I think one of the most important parts of using AI is being able to still think deeply and like struggle with the problems a little bit. I feel like that really develops your critical thinking or just like any deep sort of thinking. So I guess talking a little bit about you now. So I saw that you spent years studying how people think, make decisions, but you also decide to take that beyond academia and like you founded Northlight Intelligence. So what kind of motivated that decision and what does the company build on the work that you've already possibly been doing in cognitive science and AI?
That is a great question. So when I am not doing research itself, I enjoy helping organizations use cognitive science for practical problems. And which is why that's what was my motivation to start Northlight Intelligence. It is usually easy to find the right scientific tool than to reinvent it, in particular when it comes to using AI in ways that actually works for people, making it deliver actual benefits rather than just using it because it is fashionable. And this is what I do. When many people now try to deploy AI, try to use AI to automate some part of its process. But actually, by recent surveys, only about 5% of those deployments generate profits.
Mm,
And so when it happens, it is not because AI is not useful, it's not because AI cannot help, but because of how it was used. And having access to that expertise can usually put you on the 5%.
interesting. Mm, so I guess like finally, since we have a lot of high school students and probably college students listening who are interested in doing what you do and also doing like cognitive science, AI, and research, what advice would you give to someone who kind of wants to do what you do? And like where should they start? And what do you wish you had known when you first like got started and you were like, oh, this is what I want to do?
So I have not always known that I wanted to do exactly this. And maybe the high level idea is that your career is not going to be linear, because the world is always changing and we adapt with it. And when I was 6 years old, I wanted to go to space and be an astronaut, and I am not an astronaut. It turned out to be something else. Um, and maybe the best way to do is to think of it as a game and have fun with it. But also, before investing time in any activity, ask yourself, is this important? What is this going to give me? Um, Mathematical foundation are highly important. So people who do well in our area are usually people who come either from competitive math or coding backgrounds, or they come from background in physics or philosophy. So somehow the skills that involve people thinking deeply about problems that are fun. What makes somebody like competitive math? It is not the competition, it is specifically liking to put together a puzzle. Um, and lastly, human careers are very social. Most people get jobs through being part of social network, relationship building. It's not as much because of expertise, but because of how you work with people and people wanting to work with the type of person that you are. So don't spend all your time alone. Interact with people and give them a lot of value because that is what makes them want to give value to you.
Yeah. I liked how you kind of mentioned like the deep and like foundational math and like computing background that you need to have. I feel like a lot of the times, like when you study things like that, you're sometimes looking for a solution that there may not be a solution, but you're still determined to look for one. So I feel like that really develops your deep thinking skills and like you're able to keep on going even if like you don't think it's not like looking too bright. Yeah, and I also liked how you mentioned like being able to socialize and talk to other people and having deep connections. I think nowadays, like I know for even like not in like the cognitive science or like even in science, I even know in like finance and things like finding like a job or just getting interns is all about connections and like knowing the people. So like when you know them, when there's like a job opportunity, they're going to be like, oh, I thought of this person. So yeah, I think that's definitely important too nowadays. So both hard skills and soft skills are really important. So yeah, I guess that brings us to the end of today's episode of Mind Matter CogSci Talks. So thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your insights and experiences. It was a pleasure learning about your journey, your research, and the exciting ways you're bringing together both cognitive science and artificial intelligence to better understand both humans and machine learning and machine intelligence. And I especially appreciated your perspective on building AI that works alongside people and the importance of creating systems that are trustworthy, thoughtful, and grounded in how humans actually reason and make decisions and like based on their own perspective. So I guess thank you again for taking the time to be here today, and thank you for everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, can walk away with a deeper understanding of cognitive science and AI and how it's really important, especially with shaping the future, since I don't know, the future is probably really technological in my opinion, and also the importance of human thinking that still plays a role in that future. So I guess until next time, stay curious, keep asking questions, and thank you for listening. So thank you.
Thank you.